How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today we're going to talk about, once again, the dangers of small talk. But with that said, me, Russ, and Joe have been talking, and we know that there is going to be small talk. We understand that. But instead of us using the word small talk or the phrase small talk, we're going to utilize purposeful engagement. And I think that has a more tactical approach. And we're going to kind of break down the difference. I think it matters because small talk to me, and we'll get to that, is more casual and not as structured. But purposeful engagement, well, that sounds a bit more structured, a bit more tactical. And we all know words have meaning. Phrases have meaning. So I think it's going to be a great dialogue. And it's inspired by Will's article that he recently just did for, I think the news thing is called Medium, and it's called Guarding Conversations Using Small Talk as a Tool for Control and Compliance. I love the article. I just don't like the term small talk. I'd rather, as I said, use the term purposeful engagement. But it's going to be an interesting dialogue. We're going to break down the cons of small talk, and we're also going to discuss the pros of what we mean by purposeful engagement. But it's a good article. If you get a chance, please take a read. It's written by William Young. You can check him out on Just Corrections. All right, let me get Russ. What up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going, sir?
Good, sir. You mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I've also been a senior juvenile correctional officer, and I currently work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation at a local county jail where I'm a case manager, and also with a local county probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos on Facebook, where we are dedicated to the profession, as it were, and helping everyone that's involved in corrections be safer and happier in their correctional endeavors. I'm also quite often found here on Tier Talk.
Yes, and we love having you, Russ. And we also got Joe. What up, Joe?
Hey, morning, guys. How are y'all?
Good. Joe, you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections in 29 years, 6 months, and currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
Yes, and we love having you as well. All right, so this is going to be an interesting discussion. So me and Russ were talking in the car recently, and we kind of agree that obviously, you know, there are going to be interactions that you have with the inmate population, and they have to be very controlled interactions. And I think the word small talk, I get why people may think it's needed, but I just don't like the term, and I think the term matters. So me and Russ were talking in the car, and we said, well, you know what? What about the term purposeful engagement? Because there's an intentionality behind that. And I think when you have purposeful engagement versus small talk, it puts control into the staff member's hands, as opposed to small talk where, you know, it could be 50-50 or worse. It could go in favor of the inmate, where I feel purposeful engagement, because here's what my biggest concern is. Here we are as custody staff committing to small talk, and the inmates are the ones committing to purposeful engagement. What's your thoughts, Russ, when we had that dialogue? Oh, Russ, you're muted.
Oh, dang. I think you did that. No, I did that. I think that, you know, when we start, you know, talking about, you know, communications, you know, specifically communications with inmates, we really want to dial in what the parameters of that should be. And so, you know, just recently, as a matter of fact, you know, I had a class on this very subject. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, what are the bounds? What are the parameters of what we should be talking to inmates about, what we should be talking about, in my case, not just inmates, but also participants in the program that I help run. And so, you know, it's really important to know when you're in bounds and when you're out of bounds on that, because anything that's out of bounds could potentially, you know, lead to some type of manipulation. And certainly it could also just lead to, a general erosion of what it is that you're trying to establish with that particular participant, with that particular inmate. So it's important to understand these things. And I think this is going to be a really good dialogue on giving some guidelines about what should be acceptable and what should not be acceptable. But beyond that, just, being able to understand the structure. And I think that this is, high time. I've never had, except for that one class, except for people talking about manipulation straight out and not addressing, this whole thing about small talk. I know that I did a video on Tier Talk. I think it's been many years ago now, where we talked about quid pro quo. And we don't want to get to the point where we're ever engaging in quid pro quo. We want defined things that we can talk about and defined things that we cannot talk about.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, we discussed this before, but we're going to take it up a notch only because Will Young's article is a very well-written article. It pretty much is in agreement with everything we're saying. We're just going to kind of maybe focus on two areas where it's more for clarity, but definitely does not negate the meaning and heart of this article. It's such a good article that I thought it could be fun for us to discuss. There were just two issues I had with it that really, it doesn't take away from the meaning of the article, but I think just provides more clarity, and we'll get to that. One where there's a section where it says small talk technically can be used for intentional manipulation. And my concern with is and Will agrees, we're not here to out manipulate manipulators. We'll lose that every day. They are the pros. And also there's another area here where he does focus when it comes to small talk. He says, consider Gary Nussner, a former FBI hostage negotiator, who emphasized that building rapport with suspects was often the key to resolving situations without violence. So I just want to mention something. Situations like hostage situations or someone that needs to be calmed down. Okay, maybe the small talk is used for a distraction or whatnot, but we're talking about routine. We're talking about where if we go too far with small talk, we can become complacent with the everyday routine of engagement. So that's a lot different than using it for an immediate tactical advantage, because technically the small talk at that point is really a distraction. It really is. It's really utilized as a distraction, because at the end of the day, if all shit fails, the person doing the small talk, the person heading the hostage negotiation team, they have no idea what the tactical team is doing at this point. So if there's ever a chance to, end it, they're going to end it. That's the key. So I just want to make sure we note the difference here. And again, it's not to negate the power of his article, but the only thing I'm not 100% with is if you have people that are FBI experts, telling about how small talk is successful in the moment of a hostage situation, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the routine in which we could become complacent. So I think, like Russ said, the training and stuff, purposeful engagement gives it back to us. And again, we're not here to out manipulate manipulators. Joe, so before we start and getting really diving in, what's your thoughts? I mean, I know it's going to be a good discussion.
Yeah, I mean, in the correctional industry, 80% of the time that we engage in any kind of conversation with an inmate, there's an end game, either on our end or their end. And, the one thing to remember is, that the small talk that we start these conversations with, can, they're either listening or pumping us for information, or either we're listening and pumping them for information, using small talk, outside the parameters of normal everyday correctional, experiences where we're, needing to interview, trying to find out, about a particular situation. There's going to be times where you have these small talk discussions, especially in a county jail environment, because we have to kind of dive into their backgrounds, somewhat. But the whole scope of that is to keep it simple, keep it within your job parameters, and, don't let the conversation get away from you, because, either you're going to wind up divulging information about yourself that can be used against you sometime later on down the road, or vice versa.
Yeah, right. And he has a quote here from Machiavelli, noted in the Prince: manipulation and relationship buildings are tools that, when applied with the right intention, serve a powerful purpose. So we have to remember something too. It goes two ways. So if you're kind of telling staff, and this is not what the article's about, just on the side note, to focus on small talk to build those rapports, you could be also telling staff to be walking into situations they're not ready for. I'm being honest. You could just be like, well, hey, by the way, you engage in some small talk, you're able to build information. Yeah, okay, but they also can get it from you. And then the problem is you may be thinking that you have all these engagements that are under your control, but technically the inmate's the one asking most of the questions. So I thought maybe the concern we have here is the term small talk. I think the term small talk should be removed. I don't think that's a term right now that is beneficial to us because I think, as Russ even said, I think Joe's touching on it too. There's no tactical sense to that word. So like even when we went in the past and we said, yeah, I don't like the small talk, and yet we find ourselves doing it. It's like, well, wait a second. I don't know if I'm really doing small talk, but rather I'm engaging in purposeful dialogue. And I think that is a big difference. And I'll start with Joe first. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, a lot of our times that, our conversations are targeted for one reason or another. When we ask questions or, when we, engage in some sort of communication with an offender, again, outside of that, it's just one of them things where, I wouldn't really, outside the scope of anything that we're doing on a daily basis regarding our job functions, there really shouldn't be any kind of communication there, even if it's in the smallest of issues concerning sports, just small things like that, because like I said, anything that you say can and will be used against you at some point. It may not be today, further on down the line. It's kind of a hard topic to jump on one side of the fence or the other for me, because there's a lot of times, especially in a county jail environment, where we kind of have to engage in minor conversations because it's the only way we can kind of get communication flowing to get answers from individuals that are coming in, because the county jail side, a lot of our guys are coming in inebriated, coming in high on some sort of narcotic, so there's a lot of stuff that we have to ascertain. And unfortunately, there are times where we got to kind of finesse the situation along to kind of get things moving.
Yeah. And I want to mention something. So that's still, believe it or not, that still falls into purposeful engagement, because at the end of the day, you're not walking into a conversation that really has no purpose. You are trying to get to an end game. You're just going through whatever you got to get through to get there. And I kind of listened to what Russ said the other day, and I when I got home, I wanted to add something to it too. So purposeful engagement is what kind of we just talked about with Joe. But we also want to add the word intentionality to it. So intentional, purposeful engagement, or whatever it is, because you want to add that it's basically under your control. So at all times, you're the one that's controlling the dialogue. And I have for small talk, I said, if you use the word small talk is generally casual and unstructured, often lacking a clear objective. This approach may be used in emergencies like hostage negotiations to diffuse tension or stall for time, where the stakes demand adaptability. Purposeful engagement and corrections, however, is used routinely. That's the key. I want to make sure we're aware of that. It's used routinely because, granted, we're going to be engaging with inmates every day. So having said that, I had to put the word routinely and make it different because routine could fall into complacency. So I think if you put this on a extreme, the complacent avenue is when purposeful engagement becomes small talk. So now you're shifting, because if you got to have a way to recognize that you could be being played victim to something. So I think that purposeful engagement is what keeps you on your toes. And if you start kind of going directly to constant small talk as defined within your routine, next thing you know, inmates are learning everything about you. And, when was the last time you asked them a question? And I have here purposeful engagement and corrections, however, is used routinely and requires clear intent. It's not reactive like small talk in a crisis. but is focused on gathering information, maintaining authority, and ensuring professional boundaries. And I know a lot of people say small talk builds rapport. It could, but so could just being a professional and being respectful. I've seen good rapport building gone that way even better. Like, I may be the best small talker in the world, but if you don't respect me, I'm not going to listen to anything that you have to say. Or if I don't respect you, I'm not going to listen to anything that you have to say. But Russ, you highlighted the intentionality aspect. I took some note of the difference based on our discussion between purposeful engagement and small talk. Could you see that maybe where purposeful engagement is that vigilance and maybe to note some level of complacency is when it starts to go into small talk where it's often lacking clear objective and very unstructured?
Yeah. So first of all, if I talk about, the intentionality aspect, intentionality oftentimes, but does not necessarily, have to have, some type of end game there, and I know that there's people, they want to use that kind of umbrella term of rapport building. The problem is that rapport tends to evaporate the instant that you make someone accountable, at least, with at least with the the population dynamic that we deal with, because that's the way things go. But when you look at intentionality can be just about the structure that you're going to engage with. It doesn't necessarily have to have an end game. It just has to have boundaries, right? And so when we're looking at the boundaries that we want to use, we want to stay away from specific subjects, right? Obviously, for the most part, I'm telling you right now, you need to stay away from politics. You need to stay away from religion, okay? Because those are going to be hot topics, and we don't want to do those. What we do want to do is we want to get to a point where we have this structured dynamic, which is all about everything that happens within the confines of the institution. Weather's great, right? Weather's a really good one. Otherwise, national news that is apolitical, that one's fine too. And then anything else that happens inside the institution, meals, rec, yard, programming, all of those things can be attacked, for lack of a better term, in a very pro-social way, which really, brings our professionalism to bear and gives us a basis of common things, common to each other, that we can use to start these conversations. When we start to stray out of these areas, anytime that we bring in something that is a piece of intelligence, if you will, a piece of information from the outside, then it's about us personally in almost every case. So you have to be really careful with that, because one of the things where small talk leads to oftentimes is beyond rapport. And you'll see it, sometimes, with especially with like confidential type relationships with counselors and doctors and that kind of thing, where people start to, in both ways, identify too much with each other, and then it becomes an acquaintanceship, and then it becomes a friendship, and then, oh my God, it could become something more. So that's why we want to structure these things. That's why we want to have clear boundaries. And that's why we want to know, hey, what are good things that we can talk about and what should be off limits? And I think that's the basic structure of the animal, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. And I got it. The reason why is, I guess, doing my own studies of manipulation, having 2 books out on it now, Inmate Manipulation Decoded and Breaking Boundaries, which actually, be honest with you, Breaking Boundaries talks into the development of the undo process. Small talk is what develops into relationships. So, I mean, manipulation, yeah, you could have overt manipulation. Like, if I see that you're afraid, maybe I'll threaten you, maybe I'll coerce you. But I'll say 95% of the times when people are being strayed down the path, it truly does talk. It truly does start with small talk that starts to turn into relationships that people start confusing with rapport. And I think that's kind of been the big battle with me, is the fact that what you're doing is not rapport building. It's become your excuse when you get caught up. that's what you were doing, but you haven't produced anything. I think the funny thing is when people look at rapport, and I know we throw it out a lot on this channel too, because it seems to be a common term. But rapport, technically, I think how we may define it, maybe defining it from the inmate's benefit, as opposed to rapport for us. If you're building a rapport with the inmate, we expect you to produce. That's what we expect you to produce. But if you look at rapport building in an effort to build relationships, then your relationship with that inmate, it all gets filtered through that inmate's perspective. So I know, like, even in here, it says, small talk is rapport building. Yeah, but how are you defining that? Are you defining small talk in an effort to build a relationship with the inmate? Because then, to be honest with you, the intentionality and the purposeful engagement is no longer in your court; it's in their court. But if we all agree right now that when we utilize the word rapport, it's at the end of the day to do something productive for the agency, to give in, some tips like Russ said and stuff like that, then all right, I get it, but we don't want to use the word rapport for that either, because that could become very confusing. Okay, Russ, sorry about that.
I just have, one thing is if you're gonna call something rapport building, you have to be able to identify what that is and what it's for. I used to have, and maybe this is just my own pet beef, but people can take this under advisement and tell me what they think. I used to have a supervisor, and that he would specifically say that he was building rapport, excuse me, by giving contraband items back to inmates after we had taken them away. So what does that tell you about the process of potentially building rapport, and just giving it, or that really broad definition? It just lets things go. And that was a really bad situation to be in. It undercut the authority of the officers. It put things at play that were against, policy and procedure. And then it left people, scratching their heads as to, so what's this rapport building really about, that we can just go break policy and procedure and color outside any lines that we want to with the inmates? So then where is the border? Where is the edge of that at? And no one can ever find it when you start doing things like that.
And Russ, I want to mention something here. So I actually, we're looking up maybe some, so even if we said like strategic rapport management or trust building with intent, I want to mention something. I'm going to actually put this in here for a second. Trust building with intent. I want to highlight something here. So even if I say strategic rapport management, think about that as opposed to saying rapport developing. Think about rapport developing. Rapport development makes it looks like it's controlled based on the situation, where strategic rapport management puts you in the position of control. Trust building with intent. That word intent puts you in that position of control. I think you need something there that notes that you're the one in control, because again, through the routine of it all, sadly, small talk will just become small talk. And then you'll be on the other end when they're asking you questions. And next thing you know, everybody knows more about you than it's like, what have you given back? It's like, well, I can tell you what you're giving the population, because the population knows everything about you.
And that's why training to it is vitally important in my estimation.
Right. So now imagine that, Russ, like you just said. Imagine training. I know we take communication, but instead of doing training defined as the use of small talk, you do training based on purposeful engagement.
Yeah.
That's got a nice
purposeful,
ring to it, right?
purposeful engagement, intentionality. And that's why we want to do the training is you put people into a situation where you're able to, dissect the type of language that we're using, and then give them meaningful, purposeful definitions of what these things are and how to go about it. It's one thing to develop this over a period of years inside corrections, which is kind of like the way it happened to me. It could have happened much faster if people had been more purposeful in their direction of me and given me this type of training, because this is just something that hasn't been had. I mean, as far as I know, within my circles, in many ways, the training has been sorely lacking in this. But these are just things that I developed through my own thought processes, my own experiences, and dialogues like this one here. And so I think that, being able to jumpstart and shortcut people to that is obviously more ideal than just letting them figure it out on their own and hoping that no bad manipulation happens.
Yeah, and Joe, what's your thoughts on all this? The strategic rapport management, trust building with the time. I mean, that's a good connection to purposeful engagement, as opposed to small talk is always small talk to build rapport. It's like, well, define rapport. Well, what you're trying to say is relationship. Well, now you got to define relationship. But if you go with purposeful engagement, I like the strategic rapport management. I like the trust building with intent, because it puts the onus back on the person, back on the staff member.
Yeah, for me, rapport is built on professionalism, respectability, integrity. For me, rapport is just something that you use to kind of open up an avenue for two-way communication between you and the inmate population, and that's built by professionalism, built by integrity, by respect. It's not about the small talk. It's about the way you handle yourself, the way you communicate. If you can communicate with tact, then chances are you're more approachable than somebody who can't communicate with any kind of tact. As far as Russ's example on that supervisor giving back contraband, that's not building rapport. That's just flat being friendly. I couldn't even fathom using that as an excuse to my employees to build rapport. If that's the only way you have to build rapport, man, you got some fucking issues.
That's actual manipulation there.
Hey, you know what, Russ, what you said and Joe was, I mean, at one point it's like you're building rapport. No, you're preserving a relationship. And that's the problem.
I mean, at that point, you're really establishing a fucking relationship. I mean, you're not building it. The minute you give him his contraband back, that one of your bosses busted his ass to go into that cell and search and find, and that the relationship's established at that point.
Yeah.
May as well bring him a dozen roses, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you might as well give him a hug and a fucking cookie at that point.
Yeah, because like Russ said, and agreeing with you too, Joe. Russ mentioned that you want to test the rapport, hold the inmate accountable for something that that should be charged for, and then all of a sudden they will throw that rapport back at you. Oh, I thought you were different. Hey, I thought we were sports fans. Everything that you connected with on that small talk will wind up getting utilized in an effort to preserve. In their mind, they're using rapport. But you're thinking of it like, oh shit, this guy is trying to preserve this relationship, and it's like, holy crap. Now you're all of a sudden made think, well, maybe they're right. It's like, no, guys, they're not right. The rapport was to be something productive. That's all it is. And at the end of the day, when the inmate now starts throwing the report back at you, and you start thinking like, maybe I should give them something back, it's not rapport that you were ever doing. You were filtering through what could be a relationship that goes far beyond your prescribed role. And when it comes to that, at that point, that preservation of relationship, you're basically getting to that point where you're asking the inmate the approval to do your job, because that's how that rapport building will wind up being utilized based solely on small talk. It's going to eventually be utilized in an effort to get you to comply with them. So as I said before, guys, you're engaging in small talk. You have to assume that they're always engaging in purposeful engagement. I would have to assume that because that's the universal precaution. I got some cons here. And guys, this is great that we had this dialogue, because we're evolving from our last dialogue. So it's good to kind of see that this channel is growing a little bit, because we've had this discussion before. So it's good now to have a reason to take it to the next level, because we're learning as we're doing it right now, and how we need to translate these thoughts so they're more understood. So I did have pros and cons. What I thought I would do is I would put pros for purposeful engagement, because that's definitely a great tactical approach. And the cons would fall into what really is the definition of small talk. So I thought first we could let's start with the cons, the small talk cons. And we kind of touched on it, but I guess we could just maybe just, elaborate a little bit more. But we did discuss the first one. So you have the risk of boundary overstepping. So even in purposeful engagement, which we're always aware of, right? There always could be that high risk of straying into personal territory. That's why Russ added the word intentionality. So I think that adds a little bit to purposeful engagement, because again, purposeful engagement could still be a concern if you're not intentional with your efforts. But you got to make sure that, in this case, small talk, whatever it is, you don't want to give inmates unintended leverage. So I like what Russ said before. I think this is hugely the part where intentionality plays out. So like if you have intentionality mixed with purposeful engagement, that's a pretty good shield against inmates that are going to try to go ahead and exploit that rapport building through small talk, because this kind of lets you know that you're in control. And my thing about this, and I'll go with Russ first. Oh, no, Joe first, then Russ, because we'll try to alternate it, is if you always find yourself answering questions, and that's your, rapport building, is you're the one always answering questions, then you're small talking and they are intentionally purposeful engagement. What's your thoughts on the risk of boundary overstepping? And then we'll go with Joe first, then Russ.
Yeah, when the ratio of you answering questions is more than the offender, yeah, at that point you're being pumped for information, and their conversations become intentional. At that point, they're feeling you out. When you engage in purposeful communication, and you tend to stray outside of that with the small talk. At that point, it's not a directed communication anymore. It's not a targeted communication. So you don't have it on your mind what you're actually trying to seek. At that point, you're kind of stepping outside the scope of what needs to happen. And when that takes place, it's very easily to let a conversation get away from you and divulge sensitive information about yourself or your family or your coworkers. It's very easily to let that conversation get away from you, because at that point you don't even have a purpose to be in that conversation anymore. Now you're basically bullshitting with them. So, you just got to be aware of what your actual target is for this conversation. And, if there is no target, really don't have it, because, every time you open your mouth is a chance that you're taking to divulge sensitive information about you or your coworkers.
Right. And Russ, would love to get, this is kind of what you touched on, actually crossed into the next one too, Russ, where I think when we brought this up, when we do this as routine, because this is routine, we are going to interact with inmates. I like Russ adding the intentionality to the purposeful engagement, because we do interact with inmates a lot more than we've ever did before. So there is an increased chance that we could be manipulated. So if you're sitting there going into these units focused on small talk to get your day, make it through your day, that's going to open you up to a lot of, chances for dialogue in which boundaries can be crossed, where at least if you have that intentionality mixed with that purposeful engagement, I love the term, I really do, then at least maybe you're more in control of the dialogue and you know when to step back. Because I'm assuming every chance is a moment for some type of small talk is a chance that the inmate can try to maneuver around your boundaries. Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the case. Every little bit of information that they have gives them a chance to put you into a position where you identify more with them. Anything that they can detect, anything that they can see, you're feeling down, they can pretend to be just like you. They can pretend to have, if you give it up to them, they can pretend to be, a Raiders fan too, or whatever the local team is. And so, we have to steer away from, once again, I don't like engaging in sports with inmates, because they can really actually find out a lot about you, whether you've attended games, and things like that. So that's why I always, if I'm going to talk about things, I talk about things on a national scale with no local ties or anything like that. But all of those things, they can research you, they can profile you, they can figure out, what makes you tick. I mean, everything, just the fact, that you're maybe, wearing a wedding ring. They're going to profile that, and so know that no matter what you do, you are going to be giving up some intelligence on yourself, but it's how you manage it and how you, define enough borders to keep enough of that away from them that you no longer become a target. They'll move on to some other target. Maybe you'll be able to spot them doing that. Maybe you'll be able to stop something. Maybe you'll be able to intervene. There's a lot to this, and there's a lot to your own personal observations, which should not be colored by a relationship.
Yeah, and guys, I've seen just simple dialogue on sporting go into where the inmate was able to determine that the officer had a gambling problem. And then basically that turned into some type of leverage that the inmate had because the officer started talking about how much they bet, and that opens up the door to a whole mess of things. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, and again, I love that intentionality aspect of it because, if I'm answering questions and who truly does have control of the dialogue. I also wanted to add this before we go into the pros of what we call intentionality or the purposeful engagement. I wanted to add challenging of consistency among staff because even as we're having this discussion right now, and we kind of just mentioned small talk, we have no idea where those boundaries are, in regards to what we can and can't talk about. And I think that when you put a better label on it, the purposeful engagement, that level of intentionality, you kind of see a little bit more clearer of, well, what are the dialogues that, are truly something that you can control, that are totally within your realm, that protect a lot of your personal information, but still allows for the dialogue. So again, you have like whether, maybe what's going on in the facility to some extent that relates to them and not security concerns that they need to, that they don't need to know about. But, something related to that daily activity. And I know some people, as I said, it's, well, small talk builds the rapport. Guys, I'm going to tell you something, guys. I know officers that barely ever speak to an inmate and they have great respect amongst the inmate. It's that's not what builds their respect. What builds their respect is how you carry yourself. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that, well, I'm the guy that needs to go talk to them because I'm trained in small talk or I'm trained in hostage negotiation. They don't know you. Well, because you have the training, you may not be the one. I know, let's say Joe, who will go out there and I'm not going to, this guy knows how I roll. I may just go there and say, yo, cut your shit. You done? Good. Cut your shit. I don't need to go in there and start saying, hey, what's your favorite sports team before you start acting out, and let's talk about the Raiders. No, it's, hey, you know what? This is Joe. Joe knows him. They have a good rapport because even when I was a supervisor, if I know that if I go to de-escalate something, I could, you can have maybe people that are trained in hostage negotiation and all that stuff to de-escalate. But if I got, let's say, Sergeant Hamilton on scene who's worked with this inmate every day, I'm going to go with Hamilton. I'm going to go with Hamilton 100% because there's a way that he can communicate with him. And it probably wasn't always developed through this small talk deal. He was probably more developed by just the way Russ carries himself. The inmate's got a sense of who Russ is, and I respect how he rolls. So I think I know a lot of people push on it. And I'm not saying it's not needed. Of course it's needed. I know in the street you're going to be dealing with people that you never interacted with before most of the time, but in the prison we're dealing with people that we've interacted with. So you have a lot of people there that know the inmates. That may not be trained in all these other things, but they know the inmate. But more importantly, the inmate knows them. So I think I think it's good to kind of know where your resources are. But when it comes to challenging of a consistency among staff, it could be challenging because people don't know where the boundaries are. But if you put that label, that intentionality to it, the purposeful engagement, I think people start to realize where they may be losing control during the small talk, and maybe that's not where they want to go. And I love what Russ said before about These are certain areas that make sense. But when you start crossing into these other areas, it's not small talk. They're information gathering. I'll go with
Yeah.
Russ.
Can I?
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I wanted to get to, one thing that you were given an example of there and kind of flesh that out a little bit. There's a difference, obviously, amongst the country, depending on the type and the size of the facility that you're in. I think that for me, it was, much easier to establish and have those types of boundaries because I worked in the largest state-run corrections system in the world, right? California. And so these inmates were not inmates that I knew of, or that I had any ties with. Now I have I've had the pleasure of working in some much smaller facilities that are more localized, especially when I was working in the juvenile facility. I mean, like juveniles, their parents were coming in, and like I would know their parents and things like that. And it becomes harder to establish those boundaries because what happens is you have a commonality that already falls outside the wall of that facility, but you still have to be able to rein it back in and make sure that you are staying absolutely professional. I see the same thing happen quite a bit now at the jail where I'm at, because there are all kinds of people that I know from the community now, or that, have some kind of ties to somebody I know, and this, that, and the other thing. And so I understand that places are different, facilities are different, departments are different, but be careful about just letting yourself engage on a different level just because there's a familiarity about individuals that you have an outside connection to. And I think that that's something that really you have to be on guard, especially in that, because there's a potential that those people really, really can access more information, or they already know it, and they'll get in there and they will manipulate, because that's what these people do. That is what they do.
Right. And I think the consistency with that, Russ, is when you work at those bigger facilities, and we're talking about, when I say know the individual, know their professional role and how they carry themselves, you're not going to know every inmate, but there's a good chance a lot of them are going to know you, and they're going to know you from how you carry out your daily, your day. Are you professional with your handling of an inmate? I mean, you handle one inmate, they all know what you've done, and they're going to look at how you handle them. And trust me, if you're weak with one inmate, they'll know you're weak. If you're strong with an inmate, they'll know you're strong. I mean, word travels amongst them like super quick. So I think that they will know you. And I think sometimes you may not even have had an engagement with them, but they're going to know you. They're going to know how you carry yourself. And there's a good chance you could walk in and the person, because they've been watching you from a distance, they watch how you roll. You're walking in with respect. And I think that is greater than rapport building. My reputation coming in with me carries more than any small talk could ever imagine. My reputation coming in, who I am in regards to how I carry out my duties, is what speaks volumes to that population, whether you dealt with them or not. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, especially, with the example you gave about the hostage, the negotiators, some of these guys, sadly, and I've seen it firsthand, couldn't negotiate their way out of a wet paper sack if it was on their head, let alone quail a jail riot, quail a prison riot. And, when you used Rust as that example for, as the go-to person, because he's established some sort of rapport, what the general public needs to understand is, most of the time, these weren't positive rapport interactions that we have with these inmates. Sometimes these are inmates that we've had uses of forces on. These are inmates that we've had to put on lengthy disciplinary restrictions. And, the respectability factor comes in there due to the fact that, because, when me or Russ or Ganji comes to a cell and we tell you, if you don't comply, this is what's going to happen, and we follow through with that, the inmate has the inmate has a better chance of having a higher respect for you because of the fact that you followed through with what you say. That means a lot in the penitentiary. In the penitentiary, you don't have nothing but your word and your respect. And that's employees and inmates, because if you're not good for your word, you're not good for anything else. So, having the ability to follow through on what you say builds a better rapport and regardless, whether it's a positive or negative interaction, they're still going to have a higher respectability for you, and you'll have a better chance of an open rapport with this inmate during some sort of crisis or it may not be that he's initiating a riot. Maybe he may be having a mental health break, some sort of mental health crisis. And because of the fact that he knows that you're a person who's going to follow through on what you say, chances are he's going to be able to communicate with you better than the actual mental health representative that doesn't know this inmate from anybody. So,
I just want to mention, Joe, that was a very good point that you said, because even with the mental health crisis, they may get those trained, but at the end of the day, if I know that you're the person that comes through, because again, that's the consistency of your behavior, your role as a professional, that reputation, just the weight of it all carries so much weight when it comes to dealing with that inmate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have that now with the county jail inmates. I've been there long enough now that I'm actually starting to know some of the repeats that come in all the time. And a lot of them are understanding who I am. They know who I am. And, when one gets out of hand, you can have a handful of vendors in that pod say, hey man, don't mess with Pomponio, because when he tells you he's going to do something, he means it. So, having that kind of rapport with the offender population does carry a lot of weight.
Yeah. And I know, as I said, it's tough for us to escape that word rapport, because even Russ, who obviously understands, it's the way it's being utilized that makes it hard for us. Like, you wait, people all of a sudden they get caught up and they drop the word rapport. So it's hard for us to identify with that word in corrections because of so many people that have used that word to try to get out of accountability for what they've done. So even though we're utilizing it, we want people to know that there's a strategy behind it. And that kind of brings us to the pros of purposeful engagement. And again, as I said, I like that extreme where when purposeful engagement goes into small talk, you're kind of getting caught up in the routine of it all, the complacency within the routine. And I have one here with the first, I have three. So the first one I got is the strategic rapport management. I like that better than building. I like the management because it puts you in a position of control. But I also like this. I got purposeful engagement rather than casual small talk focuses on managing trust with intention. Now think about that, guys, because I think in our history of having these discussions, sometimes we don't realize that when we're doing this thing, building rapport, we're building it on their terms to some extent. And as Russ said, the moment they challenge that, we try to preserve the relationship. And then we get caught up and we're like, well, I was just building a rapport. And I think that's the reason people get confused when they get caught up. You weren't building a rapport. You were preserving a relationship. And you got the word rapport mixed with relationship because the inmate played you. The inmate may have made you think you were building a rapport, but they crossed it in their mind long ago that they can play that out into a relationship because you never brought anything back to the facility that they can utilize. And it helps officers facilitate compliance and gather insight into inmate behavior without forming personal connection. So I'll go with Joe first and Russ, but I like that, the strategic rapport building, but I truly like this verbiage, Joe. Purposeful engagement rather than casual small talk focuses on managing trust with intention. That's powerful. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and as a supervisor, I can honestly tell you can establish that by walking around the facility, visiting the areas, inquiring into maintenance deficiencies in cells. It doesn't take much. You may have an inmate in a cell that's had a leaking toilet for weeks on end, and you get it fixed, then boom, you have an automatic respect factor because this toilet's been leaking for a long time and you were able to get it fixed. Supervisors can do this just by walking around and looking at the culture, looking at the looking at how well the area is maintained. Sometimes a lot of it can be solved with just a mop and a bucket with some cleaning chemicals. Just the basic supervision by walking around is a good way to start strategic rapport building, especially with the inmate population and also with your staff, because there's times where staff are trying to get things done and they haven't been able to, and it's an easy fix. It's just something that keeps slipping everybody's mind, and you come in and you get it fixed right off the bat, just to get it done. Strategic rapport building, especially amongst supervision, I can't stress it enough. Management by walking around.
Yeah, I like that. And I want to mention something too when it comes to this strategic rapport. You know what's funny? I'm going to go back on what Russ said a little bit too with the rapport. Rapport shouldn't cause you to be hesitant as a staff member if you have to engage in conflict with the inmate. Whether it's going to be a no you got to provide them, or a directive they're not going to want to do. It doesn't matter. We could be building rapport or not. I got to tell you no on this. It's a no. But it doesn't matter. It's a no. The relationship is what makes it difficult to say a no. That's the problem. So when you start to realize, like, I can't tell this inmate no, or whatever it is, well, then that's not, but I'm building rapport. That's not a rapport. You not telling the inmate no is because the inmate got to you. The inmate got to you. And then when you have a supervisor or someone that may come in and say, well, Russ is having a problem with this inmate. Oh, don't worry. I'll talk to him, have a rapport with him. No. You don't need to. Russ will talk to him. Russ has got to manage it. We're not talking about inmate in crisis now, because that can be another thing. Well, anytime this inmate, acts up, we're going to give him attention. We're going to bring, this person down who knows him the best. And no, you can't do that each and every time, because you're giving the inmate a way to circumvent. And also, I will guarantee you, and I know this may sound crazy, guys, but bear with me on this. And I think this is true. If Russ is having a problem, let's say with inmate Joe, and Joe just doesn't want to listen to Russ, so I come in and I'm the one that's got a connection with Joe, and I'm like, you know what, Russ, I'll handle it. Joe knows me. Now here's the problem. I start getting this rapport with Joe. I start putting myself on this pedestal that I'm that rapport person, that I'm the one that knows how to talk to inmates. I'm the one that can settle all problems, but I don't really have control of that technically. And when I'm not able to do it, what's to say I'm not going to compromise a little bit just to keep myself on that pedestal? Am I lying? Could it be? I'm here and I'm being called all the time to be that person to maintain the rapport. And now I'm talking to the inmate, and here we are thinking he's maintaining rapport. Okay, the inmate's going to do. Well, what made your approach different than mine? I'm curious. Well, he knows me. I don't know, because I gave him a directive. Technically, you gave him a directive. Was your directive more conditional? I'm not understanding why he accepts the directive from you and they're not accepting the directive from me. Well, he knows me more. That I'm sorry. I'm not 100% all the time in line with that. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, that's really good, because that kind of comes into that.
You're smiling, man. That's a good one.
Well, it's kind of related to what I call the complacency of success. You can go into this profession and you can rack up a lot of successes, and while you're doing that, you might start to believe your own press, and that can start to be dangerous, because those successes may not be predicated on a lot of skill, or they may be only predicated on a certain level of skill beyond which you're going to meet your sudden demise. You're going to have the anti-success. You're going to lose in some way. And so when we're pressing for issues in order to try and maintain status, which is something that we do all the time, whether we want to admit it or not, you can become compromised in your own soul with regard to that, and give up and take a bad position in order to maintain. I don't want to call it a facade, because you may actually have some level of skill, But if you're not adept at detecting that in yourself, and hell, I put myself through this before. Believe me, I start to believe my own press, and the next thing you know, I'm making a mistake. So I think that's good to know. I think that you have to be introspective about what it is that you're achieving or not achieving, and be careful not to take bad positions in order to maintain, some level of perceived success rather than true success.
Yeah, but I love that, Russ, because it actually, be honest with you, if it's not controlled correctly, it gives the inmates another way to circumvent. So I'm not talking about, I mean, obviously there's moments of crisis we mentioned where, maybe you want that trained special, even though if I have someone that knows the inmate well, that may work out. But this is more of every day where if you're doing the job, let's say Russ is running the unit, and every day during the normal routine of things, he has Joe that just likes to be non-compliant. And then I'm like, you know what, man? Let me call in Ganji work. I say at one point, you got to stop. Joe's got to have to get charged. I'm not looking to de-escalate this at this point. I'm looking because Joe's being non-compliant to me. Because here's the funny thing. Even if Joe winds up doing it, he didn't do it for the officer that gave the directive. He did it for the person who could be trying to sadly say they're working their rapport. What were you going to say, Russ?
Oh, I momentarily lost what I was going to say there. It just had made me think back on something. I might think about it again here.
All right, well, feel free. I just my thing is I want to make sure people know clearly that this is more about the everyday routine of managing the inmates. Okay, Russ.
Oh, so that was occurring to me. There are things that are, incidental and episodic versus routine. And so we largely deal in routine. I know that, we focus a lot on the things that are episodic or incidental, but that's not the truth of things. And we have to be careful because there is a complacency in routine. And then we just start to accept the conversation that we're having as normal and inside the bounds when we went outside the bounds a long time ago.
And would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, when especially if you're called to an area for a non-compliant offender, if when I walk in, I'm there to back your play. I'm not going to communicate with this inmate. I'm going to stand there and let you finish communicating with that inmate, and then we're going to get compliance. If I intervene on your behalf in front of you, it's not at that point. It's not about attaining compliance. It's turned into negotiation at this point, and you're now negotiating with this offender to follow this officer's lawful and commandful order. And, in the course of doing that, because of the fact that I've done this, I've not only entered into a negotiation with this offender, I've taken the authority of this officer who gave this order, a lawful order to follow this policy, so, taking over conversations, or taking over scenes sometimes is not a good thing, because, you've taken your officer's authority from them at that point, especially in front of other offenders on the pod. And you let that inmate know that you're open to negotiation, which means he may get what he wants. It's not about that. If I'm there at that point, it's all about compliance. It's not about the communication. It's about compliance. If this officer gave you a legal and lawful order, and it is a legal and lawful order to me, we're going to get that compliance. We're either going to get it immediately or we're going to get it eventually, but we're going to get it. I'm not going to take my officer's authority by trying to enter into a negotiation with you for something that you should have followed in the first place. That's in the policy. It's in the rules. It's in the, it's in all the requirements, so, I never did agree with that. I've always let my officers know that, and even my sergeants that work for me, if you're in that area, that is your house. You run it. If you can't get the compliance, by all means, please call me. because, most of the offender population know when Lieutenant Pomponio put his coffee down, somebody's ass was going to lockup. That's all there was to it. And if I got to come down there, we're going to get compliance either instantly or eventually, but we're going to get that compliance. So, you got to be careful with intervening for people on their behalf, because subconsciously, and you may not realize it right off the bat, you're actually taking a piece of their authority away from them, and you can't do that. Once you do that, their respectability factor in that area has dropped down because, Hamilton's not, he ain't got the nuts enough to get his own compliance. He's got to call Lieutenant Pomponio down there.
Especially when you take the inmate aside and don't even address it with the officer that's present.
Absolutely.
You make it a sidebar.
When I go down to an area, the first thing I do is I call the officer from the area.
Yeah.
Because I want to hear I want to hear what's going on from that officer first before I even hear from the offender. And I'm not going to talk to the officer for their version of events in front of the offender. We're going to do that outside the scope and their boundaries, because we all know how it plays out when you try to do that. The officer's giving you their version and the inmate's bumping and yelling and all that kind of shit. So, I've always pulled them out first so I can hear their version of events. And then I'll go to the inmate cell, ask them for their version of events. And, 90% of the time they know they were supposed to follow the rule to begin with. They're just pissed off because they just happen to be the one the officer gave the order to.
What's your thoughts on that, Russ? I know you had something there.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with Joe on that. I remember, day one being a sergeant and, coming out there onto, it was a 1100 man, compound, one section of the prison I was in. And I'll tell you, I had just, immediately, inmates coming up to me. A lot of them knew me and stuff, but they knew me as an officer and not a sergeant. And I wanted to establish things with both the offender population and with my people. And so, they would come up with a complaint about the officer or whatever. And I said, hold on. Do you have permission to talk to me? And boy, it stopped him in a track. What do you mean? I said, you know what? He's running your section down there. If he wants you to talk to me, then he will give you permission to talk to me. And it set a whole new tone on a whole lot of things that were going on in that particular area, because they were just used to, bypassing that. And what rapport the officers had built was being undermined in a lot of ways. And so it was just, I thought it was, really healthy to give them back the power. And then if there was anything outside the bounds that they needed handled because they lacked the power or the training or the proper type of initiative to get it done, then they could kick it back to me. But that was all important at that point of taking that yard and making it more serviceable, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because as we're talking about it now, it's like you got the ones that could be trying to, let's say, build that rapport, but now cause an isolation between them and their peers. It's like, okay, you just chatted with them. Now you're coming back and you're defending him, minimizing accountability. So is that rapport building? I mean, that to me is not. That means that you're under the thumb of the inmate. I was looking up things like, with the rapport building, when it becomes undue is the crossing of personal boundary, the crossing over of personal boundaries, the defending when they're wrong, the emotional attachment, dependency, relying on rapport to maintain control, which can reduce authority and compromise safety. We talked about it's like giving the inmate permission for you to do your job, oversharing of facility information, like telling them when the search is going to be done or something, or frequent unstructured interaction. That's my concern. That's one of the things where you're the officer or whatever, you're walking the unit and you're looking for the small talk engagements. So now you're going in there and that's your daily day, just shooting the shit with everyone. And literally next thing you know, you come in and everybody knows everything about you. It's like, yeah, because your dialogues are unstructured. You're just going in and answering questions and you come in one day and everybody knows everything about you. I got the, obviously we know purposeful engagement is definitely enhanced situational awareness. It's going to give you a good read of the inmate population. And that's, if anything, that's a good report back, because then you could say, hey, this is what I got. And now I'm going to go ahead and tell the supervisors, this is how the unit's running today. This is what I got. I mean, again, strategic rapport should have to lead to something that can benefit the facility at some point, not benefit the inmate. I mean, that's a good difference too. I mean, who is the rapport benefiting right now? And the last thing I wanted to add is this is the part that really is control through intentional communication. So what I have here is basically purposeful engagement enables officers to direct conversation strategically, gathering useful information and reinforcing authority, unlike the casual, unstructured nature of small talk. Remember, guys, I want people to know something, and I think this matters. Communication is different in corrections because you're dealing with the possibility of being manipulated. I'm not going to dummy that down. That is it, and you're going to have to engage. There's the universal precaution, but there's a training. It's like, you got to train people how to communicate. You're communicating with pro manipulators. It's a different ball game. It's not like the average dialogue you may have on the street just to kill time. Everything in their mind could be an effort to gain knowledge and authority in that knowledge, because knowledge brings about leverage. Leverage brings about authority. So these purposeful engagements do require some level of structure and training, because people have to be aware that you're not talking to the average Joe. You're talking to someone that is gaining information for potential leverage later on. So it's good to know that if you're trained in it, now you're able to communicate back to them. But it's not even an effort to challenge the back and forth, but it's an effort for you to realize that you're giving up too much and you got to stop. You got to connect. You got to correct yourself. Because I'll tell you, some inmates will have a way of, like even the politics, like Russ said. I think it's a great idea not to talk about politics, like Russ said, because at the end of the day, people are very engaged in politics. And there's a lot you can know about somebody by just who they vote for. So it's like, but sometimes politics, because it can lead to a heating engagement, could literally, you could find out so much about somebody during that time span. So, I'll go with Russ first and Joe. Obviously, purposeful engagement, man. It's how controlling intentional communication. I mean, I love that. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah. So, I know that when you and I were talking about this, we started, bringing that phrase into it that's not usually brought into things like this, which was, universal precautions. Because usually, we're thinking about, like gloving up when we're touching something yucky or things like that. But in this case, universal precautions is basically, it's your bulkhead against, giving up, information that we don't want them to have. And that can be about our person, that can be about the institution, et cetera. So when we start to think about it in those confines, we need the reason we say the universal part is these are things that everybody should be doing. And these are things that everybody should be doing all the time. That's what makes them universal. So when we're giving training on this, and I hope that some facilities out there will use this, is start teaching your staff to think in that critical manner in order to engage those universal precautions. Teach them, okay, what is acceptable? Everything within the confines of the institutional that's not confidential or involves some part of the security is all good. Things on a national scale without local ties, the weather, et cetera, like that. And encourage them to go out there and start developing these communication skills and learning about when they get backed into a corner where the inmate wants them to give something up, and teach them how to deflect that, and teach them, to just start, becoming a master at it, to really be able to communicate within the confines of those presets, within the confines of that universal precaution. That's what we want. That's what we need. And I think that really does add to the safety and security of the institution.
I agree. And Joe, you have anything like to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, teaching your staff how to use good verbal judo and when to use their listening skills and how to ear hustle and good deflection skills is a must. Because there's times where we have things going on, that we don't want the offender population to know. We don't want them to know that we know where their hooch is. We don't want them to know that we know where a certain weapon is. We don't want them to know that we know there's narcotics in cell 223 on 2 row. We don't, there's things that we don't want out there. Unfortunately, we have to involve some staff in this because, we're going to interrupt things in their area. So we kind of give them a heads up. So therefore, teaching your people how to communicate, how to keep sensitive items to themselves, learning how to deflect because, the inmate population is going to pump you for information. Hey man, I heard we're going to get shook down today, man. Is that true? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm here working the area. Being able to use good communication skills, intentional communication skills for good purpose, it's a must. And I really think that academies need to lean more on communication skills as part of their syllabus for academies, because, a lot of these people go in there really unprepared communication wise. We teach them how to, we teach them how to be professional, how to be tactful and that kind of stuff. But we don't really get down to the good nitty gritties of communication when we're dealing with, sensitive issues on a daily basis. And I think that's something that a lot of academies really need to incorporate into their syllabus for academies, because I think it would be highly favorable for them to be able to learn how to just go in there and ear hustle and listen to the tips and tricks of what's going on in their area and be able to communicate that back to their supervisors. I just think it's something that we really need to hit on more.
And it's funny, guys. Sometimes even just body language wise, if I'm interacting with an inmate and all of a sudden, the inmate's starting to go from in front of me to the side of me, even the dialogue through small talk could just shift the person's body next to me. And it's funny, staff will come in and all of a sudden I don't want to be bothered by staff. I want to continue having my dialogue with the inmate. I'm annoyed now that my supervisor's checking on me, or I'm annoyed now that the other officer came in the unit because I'm so into this dialogue with the inmate, and it's just it's a bad view. I'm looking at it and I see the inmate alongside you, and whatever the dialogue is, it's like, okay, now if I want to talk to you about something else and I'm the staff, I'm your peer, I'm the nuisance. Because the better dialogue you're having seems to be with the inmate. And that's why when you have people that work at these satellite units or not always visited by staff, you got to make sure you get out there, because small talk will turn into influence pretty quick. And you got to be there to kind of nip that once in a while. And even maybe one day spending a day out there with them if you can. The key is, I truly do believe it starts with unstructured small talk. It has to. And then eventually it evolves into some level of influence. And I've seen staff that even if it's just about a sport game, like I cannot wait to go back in and tell inmate such and such that the Giants won. What are you doing? You took that small talk from the facility to your home. And now you want to go back to the facility and can't wait to speak to the inmate based on the fact that you're talking about sports. You're telling me that doesn't matter? Of course it matters. You're thinking of the inmate when you're home. That they're already in your head. So, something has, and the reason why, guys, is because they know sports connects with you. They know you're passionate about that. So I'm going to kind of share into that. And how many times have you seen inmates that aren't sports fans that all of a sudden have the time to become one? Learn it, get books, build that dialogue. And it's a starter point too. You can have an inmate that finds out Russ is a big fan of the Giants, and one day he just starts hanging up Giant stuff in his cell because he thinks that's going to get Russ's attention, because Russ talks about that all the time. Well, shoot, I may not be able to get Russ to talk to me, but if I do this, the situation will get him to talk to me. So I know that he talks to Joe, inmate Joe, on the Giants. So I'm going to go ahead and put the Giants up. Next thing you know, you got a whole unit that are Giants fans. And it's like, wow, that's unique. No, they're setting up the officer. Because one inmate found out they were a Giants fan, and they know that's the best way to get Russ engaged. Just throwing it out there. Hey, Russ, you have anything to say in closing?
Yeah, people, this is, this is a profession about getting out there and learning it and doing and making mistakes. But, try and minimize those, but, engage your brain and think about, what the critical factors are in every single engagement that you have with inmates, and you'll be better off for it. And just, try and, figure out what's going on, why it's going on, and do your best and establish these structures in your mind that you don't go beyond. And you'll be safer and better prepared. And, I think that there's kind of actually, a high or a thrill from being able to, stay professional, remain professional, and bringing things out that are critical. So many times guys would give up information to me, and they weren't snitching. But it was through, structured interactions like this that, you can go in there and figure things out. You can read body language. You can read their circle talking. And, there's a lot more to this. You're not just there to bring them out of their cell and put them back. You're in there to impact safety and security. And I think more people should look at it that way.
I agree. I like that. And Joe, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, just remember every time that, you guys communicate with an offender or inmate or, whatever they're called at your facility. I know they differ from state to state. Just, keep the communication in mind with this inmate's always going to have some sort of end game. So, keep your communication professional, keep your, communication to the point, stay on task. And just understand that, inmates have 24 hours a day to realize how to get to somebody. So, when you communicate with them, understand that, there's probably an end game in their realm of communication somewhere. So just be mindful of that. Use situational awareness whenever you can. Communication is not always verbal. Like Russ said, sometimes, you walk through them pods and you see them throwing signs through their windows to each other. Learn as much as you can about their communications. You would be surprised as to what you can learn by not allowing them to catch on to the fact that they know, that what they're talking about. So, try to take it all in, use situational awareness and I'm not saying close off communications with an inmate. I'm just saying, only utilize communications with an inmate when there's a directive or there's a task that needs to be accomplished. I never was a big fan of talking about politics or religion in the workplace, even with my staff. It's just, those are two conversations that just never end well. So it's, for me, it's not even a topic I discuss while I'm at the workplace. So, just use effective communication for its intended purpose. And, just realize that, be mindful of what information you divulge about yourself.
Yeah. And guys, in my close, I actually have a video out there. I think 15 or 14 areas you could fall complacent in. I know it's used in training because someone messaged me the other day. I think the part here that matters is complacency is technically a mindset before it's recognized in your behavior by others. So I think you're the first person to recognize it through feeling, and then it carries out in your behaviors where people can now observe and say, yo, you're doing that a little bit differently. And that's where we can watch for each other. But the feeling is what matters first. So when you start feeling that your engagement, I think, is shifting from purposeful engagement or intentional purposeful engagement to just small talk, just for the sake of small talk, you got to feel that. And then maybe you got to step back a little bit, because small talk over time carries. day by day, routine by routine. And the next thing you know, you're not going to remember every dialogue that you had and the information that you're giving out. And how, by the way, these inmates all communicate, let's say. So now you're giving out different things to different people, and they're able to find out a good, based on different interests. Russ is interested in sports, so I'll talk to Russ about sports, and then Joe's interested in this, so I'll talk to, as an inmate, let's say Joe's an inmate, and I'm going to talk to Joe on this. All of a sudden, all these inmates have these different interests. They're playing the game, and I'm feeding into everyone just an effort to build small talk. And, making it look like that, we have this connection on sports, or we have a similar connection on politics or whatever it is. The next thing you know, maybe not free, but they put everything together. They got a hell of a portfolio on you, from all those different dialogues you're having with different people spread over the course of time. So now you got it spread out, duration of time, and you're telling me that small talk can't lead to them knowing you and creating leverage? It's insane. Purposeful engagement, intentionality. Love it. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.